I'll give you your ring back and I'll leave. Last night was awful. This has never happened before in my whole entire life. No matter how sick I've gotten, I've never the bed. I can't tell him that. I can't tell him.
You have to.
I can't. He's never gonna forgive this. How is he gonna forgive that?
Daniel and Lisa's story didn't start in chaos. It began like so many 90-day fiancé romances, with messages, emojis, and late-night calls that made Daniel feel like he'd finally found someone who understood him in a way few people ever had. From the very beginning, there was a spark, a sense of possibility that had fans rooting for them as if they were witnessing a fairy tale in real time, a modern romance unfolding over screens and time zone. Lisa was charismatic, attentive, and persuasive, painting a picture of a shared future that felt tangible, something Daniel could imagine with clarity, a home together in America, dinners, holidays, maybe even children. It was the kind of optimism that makes people forget reality for a while, the kind of hope that encourages full belief in promises that haven't yet been tested. The viewers could see it too. In those early clips, there was laughter, playful teasing, and an almost electric energy in their calls and visits that made people feel invested in their potential happiness. Daniel, like anyone else in the midst of new love, wanted to trust completely. He found himself drawn to Lisa's words, to the way she described their plans as if they had already happened. He marveled at her charm, at the sense of adventure she projected, and in his heart, the relationship felt authentic. For the first few months, everything seemed aligned. Fans were quick to comment on social media, cheering for their compatibility and hoping that this online connection could withstand the trials of long-distance love. It was easy to root for them, easy to believe in the narrative of love overcoming distance. But beneath the surface, subtle discrepancies began to ripple like small waves that hinted at deeper tension. Lisa's charm was unmistakable, but even in those early days, attentive viewers might have noticed that her priorities sometimes didn't match Daniel. While he shared pictures of family moments or plans for trips that would build intimacy, Lisa often seemed distracted by work obligations or social commitments that she didn't fully explain. Occasionally, messages would arrive at odd hours, or conversations would be cut short, leaving Daniel puzzled but willing to overlook it. Those small gaps, imperceptible at first, planted tiny seeds of unease. The narrative maintained a hopeful tone, but careful eyes could catch the first flickers of tension, the subtle misalignments in communication that would later take on far greater significance. Despite these minor inconsistencies, Daniel allowed himself to be swept up in optimism. In his mind, the relationship felt real because he wanted it to be. He trusted Lisa's words, her promises, and the image of a life together. That trust, however, also created vulnerability. And that vulnerability is a key reason why fans felt a visceral connection to his experience. The audience is not just observing a romance, they are watching someone navigate hope, excitement, and the earliest signs of uncertainty, feeling the thrill of connection alongside the creeping sense that not everything is as it appears. As the relationship progressed, the online communication intensified. Video calls replaced texts, and longer conversations became a daily fixture. They shared hopes, dreams, and personal stories in ways that built a sense of intimacy despite the miles between them. Daniel's friends noticed the enthusiasm and often encouraged him, but some subtle cautionary signs began to emerge. Lisa's responsiveness sometimes fluctuated. She would vanish online for hours, leaving Daniel anxious and guessing. Occasionally, the conversation would pivot away from emotional connection to logistical concerns in a way that felt rehearsed, almost methodical. Fans who pay close attention to social media interactions could already see the pattern forming, the slight imbalance between expressive intimacy and guardedness, a pattern that would later evolve into the very tension that would upend the engagement. In those early episodes, Lisa's narrative was compelling. She painted herself as committed, loyal, and looking forward to a life in America, and Daniel, seeking certainty in a complex world, bought into it wholeheartedly. The dynamic created a sense of excitement for viewers because everything was framed as romantic possibility. The promise of meeting in person, planning for the future, imagining shared spaces and experiences. Even small glimpses of hesitation or distraction were easily dismissed in the context of long-distance romance, because it felt plausible that life, work, or logistics could interrupt the flow of constant connection. The story at this stage also benefited from timing. Daniel's patience, his willingness to forgive lapses or delayed responses, allowed the relationship to develop further before any serious red flags became undeniable. The hopefulness of early romance functioned as a narrative anchor, providing contrast to the tension and chaos that would later define the engagement period. Viewers could see both sides, Daniel's genuine belief and excitement, and the subtle indicators that hinted something wasn't aligning perfectly. These early episodes created investment. Fans wanted to see Daniel's trust rewarded to witness the relationship flourish. But the narrative cleverly introduced a countercurrent, small inconsistencies, hints of evasiveness, and patterns that, when stacked together, suggested that Daniel's perception of Lisa's commitment might not capture the full picture. Then came the moments that began eroding the early optimism. Calls that were once playful and affectionate began to carry undertones of defensiveness. Lisa's responses to questions about her life, her previous relationships, or even seemingly minor logistical matters sometimes felt vague or dismissive. Daniel noticed, but in the haze of excitement and affection, he often rationalized her behavior. He reminded himself that long-distance relationships are complicated, that miscommunications happen, and that patience is required. Yet, these small anomalies were accumulating, building a foundation of tension that would later serve as context for the explosive discoveries. By the time the engagement was formally announced, the excitement had started to wane. The initial thrill of the proposal and shared promises gave way to subtle dissonance. Fans might remember the way Daniel's smiles in early footage sometimes faltered, how he occasionally appeared concerned during conversations that should have been joyous. Those familiar with behavioral cues could detect unease, though it was barely perceptible compared to the hope and optimism still driving most of the relationship. Lisa, for her part, maintained the appearance of commitment, continuing to articulate plans for life in America and shared experiences, yet the seeds of behavioral inconsistencies were now firmly planted, invisible to some but glaring in retrospect. This segment ends not with drama but with tension, a slow shift from unwavering hope to careful scrutiny. Engagement excitement, once unshakable, begins to crack under the weight of repeated small anomalies. The narrative sets up the audience for the next wave of conflict, preparing them to witness how trust, perception, and hidden behaviors interact to create the perfect conditions for the explosive revelations that follow. Viewers are left with questions. Which patterns were harmless quirks, and which were the earliest indicators of deception? How much of Daniel's optimism was based on genuine connection, and how much on selective perception? These unanswered questions keep viewers invested, pulling them forward to discover the critical turning points in the relationship. The beauty of this stage of the story lies in its duality. Optimism and subtle warning signs coexist, building suspense through contrast. Daniel's hope draws viewers emotionally close, creating empathy and alignment with his perspective. At the same time, the emerging inconsistencies spark curiosity, prompting the audience to anticipate what might happen next, to detect clues in Lisa's behavior, and to engage with the story actively. It's a delicate balance, one that makes the transition into the coming tension feel organic and irresistible. Daniel had started noticing cracks in the foundation of what he thought was an unshakable connection. Little warning signs that seemed insignificant at first, but slowly grew into an undeniable pattern. Every time he reached for his phone or tried to ask a simple question, he would notice Lisa instinctively shielding hers, flipping the screen down or stepping into another room. At first, Daniel tried to laugh it off, to tell himself that privacy is normal, that everyone has secrets that aren't meant to harm their partner, but the repetition made it impossible to ignore. It wasn't just a single instance, it was consistent, almost ritualistic, and with each late night call Lisa took away from his presence, Daniel felt a little more distance creeping between them, an invisible space that widened with every unanswered question, every hurried explanation, every casual deflection. The tension didn't announce itself dramatically, it slipped in quietly, like a shadow stretching across the edges of their daily life. Conversations that once felt easy now carried weight. Daniel found himself pausing mid-sentence, measuring his words, trying not to trigger defensiveness or provoke dismissive replies. Lisa's tone occasionally shifted when he asked simple things like who she was speaking to or why she seemed distracted. Her answers were always calm, polite, and just vague enough to feel non-threatening, but Daniel could sense the subtle evasion underneath. For someone who had given his trust so fully, these tiny gaps in communication became glaring cracks in the relationship. At the same time, Daniel started to notice small behavioral patterns that didn't fit the narrative of someone fully committed to their engagement. Lisa would step away to take calls at odd hours, sometimes whispering just out of earshot, sometimes closing doors he couldn't open without knocking. He rationalized, tried to soothe himself, but each rationalization felt thinner than the last. The excitement and optimism from earlier stages of the relationship were fading, replaced by a persistent knot in his stomach and unease that he couldn't shake. For viewers, this is where engagement in the story becomes deeper because it mirrors real-life relationships where trust is challenged not by a single event, but by accumulation. Little inconsistencies that make someone question their assumptions, their feelings, and ultimately their judgment. The emotional tension built gradually but relentless. Daniel began to replay moments in his mind. The delayed responses, the sudden departures, the careful guarding of devices. He asked himself questions that he couldn't answer and tried to ignore doubts that refused to vanish. Was he overreacting? Was this normal behavior for someone balancing work, personal obligations, and a long-distance relationship? Or was there a deeper reason behind every hidden phone call, every private conversation? The ambiguity itself created suspense for viewers because it allowed room for multiple interpretations, letting the audience feel both empathy for Daniel's confusion and curiosity about Lisa's intentions. Even as Daniel tried to maintain composure, the stress accumulated. The contrast between the hope of their early connection and the reality of these warning signs made him increasingly alert, hyper-aware of every small action. He began noticing things he hadn't considered before. How Lisa sometimes seemed distracted even during shared moments. How she avoided certain topics. How her body language shifted when he asked about seemingly trivial matters. To viewers, these observations act as subtle clues, letting them analyze behavior without explicitly accusing anyone, maintaining a balance between storytelling and fairness. Every unanswered question and every unexplained action increased the stakes. Daniel's mind raced with possibilities. Could these behaviors indicate a simple misunderstanding, an overworked schedule, or nerves in the relationship? Or was there something more serious lurking behind the surface, a secret he hadn't yet uncovered? His inner conflict became palpable, and it's precisely this emotional tension that keeps the audience engaged. They are now invested in not only the external narrative, but in Daniel's psychological state, feeling the stress and doubt alongside him. Then came the tipping point. While preparing for another evening together, Daniel noticed Lisa's laptop left open on the kitchen counter, the screen glowing faintly in the dim light. His heart skipped a beat. The laptop wasn't just a tool. It was a window into private information, something he had never been allowed to access, something that could either confirm or shatter his growing suspicions. The presence of the laptop, seemingly innocuous, suddenly carried immense significance. Every instinct screamed that this was more than a device. It was a symbol of hidden realities and potentially unspoken truth. Daniel hesitated, staring at the screen, feeling the weight of anticipation, knowing that whatever was on that laptop could change everything. For viewers, this is the moment the story transitions from tension to imminent revelation. The stage is set for a confrontation with evidence, for the emotional stakes to climb higher than ever before. The audience is left wondering, what did he see? How bad could it be? Could it justify the distrust he had been feeling, or would it be a misinterpretation of something innocent? The open laptop becomes the physical manifestation of uncertainty, the pivot around which the next phase of the narrative will unfold, compelling viewers to stay glued to the story. Every subtle pattern, every guarded action, every late-night conversation had led to this moment. Daniel's doubts, once manageable, now demanded attention. The audience experiences the same escalating tension, understanding that the relationship is at a critical juncture and that the next steps Daniel takes could redefine everything. The small cracks in trust have become visible fractures, and the quiet unease has escalated into a suspenseful waiting game that feels immediate, urgent, and emotionally charged. By focusing on behaviors, locked phones, secretive calls, avoidance, and subtle evasions, the story humanizes both Daniel and Lisa without resorting to personal attack. Viewers are invited to analyze, speculate, and empathize, creating active engagement while maintaining a narrative grounded in publicly observable action. The accumulation of stress, uncertainty, and psychological tension mirrors the real-life experience of discovering inconsistencies in someone you care about, keeping the story relatable and emotionally resonant. The segment ends with Daniel fixating on the open laptop, a silent, glowing portal into information he hadn't yet uncovered. The implications are staggering, the anticipation unbearable. Viewers are left perched on the edge of revelation, their curiosity amplified by months of minor warning signs finally converging into an undeniable turning point. Every hesitation, every glance, every previous behavior now carries heightened significance, priming the audience for the dramatic escalation that is about to follow. The narrative has successfully shifted from hopeful optimism to suspense-filled uncertainty, ensuring that viewers remain emotionally invested in the outcome and desperate to see the next phase of the story. Dr. Daniel's heart raced the moment his eyes fell on the screen. At first, it looked like a normal spreadsheet, one of those documents anyone could leave open without a second thought. But then he noticed the name. Dozens of them, each accompanied by notes, timestamps, and details that seemed too organized to be casual or accidental. Daniel's mind refused to process it at first, a cocktail of disbelief and denial making him question whether he was seeing the reality of the situation or letting paranoia twist ordinary information into something sinister. His stomach tightened, and every rational thought seemed to blur as the weight of the potential implications pressed down on him. For fans, this is the turning point, the moment that transforms quiet suspicion into a full-blown crisis that demands attention. As Daniel scanned the document, he saw more than names. There were notes about conversations, mentions of promises, references to money, and brief remarks that suggested ongoing commitment. Nothing explicitly confirmed wrongdoing, but the sheer volume and pattern of the entries created a sense of deliberate organization, something that felt both personal and alarming. Each line, each notation was a new puzzle piece, and the puzzle didn't match the picture of honesty and transparency he believed had defined their relationship. He could feel the familiar optimism of earlier days slipping away, replaced by an acute awareness that he might have been missing critical parts of Lisa's life. His mind spun as he tried to rationalize what he saw. Could this be part of her work? Some complex project, a hobby, or a social initiative he didn't understand? Or was it something more personal? Every possible explanation seemed equally plausible and equally disturbing. Daniel's confusion mirrored the tension viewers feel as they witnessed the discovery alongside him. By presenting the details without judgment, the narrative allows the audience to speculate, to feel the uncertainty, and to engage actively in the story. It's the same tension anyone would experience discovering a hidden layer in a relationship, something that raises questions about trust, intent, and the very foundation of commitment. The initial shock quickly evolved into concern. Daniel began connecting dots in his mind, recalling past behaviors that now seemed to align with this document. The secretive calls, the constant guarding of devices, the subtle evasions. Each memory, once dismissed, now gained new significance. The earlier moments of doubt, the minor cracks in communication, the fleeting anxiety, all of it coalesced into a portrait that demanded investigation. For viewers, this moment deepens engagement because it combines evidence with human reaction. We're not just seeing the document, we're seeing its impact on someone who thought he knew the person sitting across from him. Daniel's approach shifted instinctively from disbelief to cautious analysis. He leaned closer, studying every entry, attempting to discern patterns without leaping to conclusions. The names weren't random. There was order, regularity, and repetition. The messages attached to each name suggested ongoing communication. Some entries hinted at promises, some referenced future meetings, others noted financial interactions. Again, nothing proved deceit, but the sheer consistency of the information painted a picture that demanded closer attention. It was an uncomfortable realization for Daniel, an awareness that the life he believed in might be only one layer of a more complicated reality. At this point, confusion gave way to investigative instinct. Daniel knew he needed to verify, to cross-check, to find evidence that could either confirm or dispel the growing doubts in his mind. He started to plan discreetly, considering which social media platforms to check, which past posts and interactions might shed light on what he was seeing, and how best to preserve what he discovered without tipping off Lisa prematurely. This internal strategy highlighted his shift from emotional reaction to methodical action, a necessary step for anyone confronting uncertainty in a relationship. The viewers follow along, caught between empathy for Daniel's shock and curiosity about what further information might emerge. Even as he sat there, staring at the glowing laptop screen, Daniel's mind raced with implications. If these names truly represented personal connections outside of their engagement, it would suggest more than minor secrets. It would indicate overlapping emotional investments, hidden commitments, and potential deception. If, however, there was a reasonable explanation, it would require patience, understanding, and careful clarification. The tension was magnified by this ambiguity. The narrative doesn't reveal the truth outright, which keeps viewers engaged, prompting them to speculate and to emotionally invest in both the evidence and Daniel's response. The document acted as a mirror, reflecting not only potential actions of Lisa, but also Daniel's own responses, his instincts, and his capacity for trust and skepticism. Each entry challenged him to reassess the reality he had accepted for months, forcing a confrontation with ambiguity that felt both painful and urgent. Viewers experienced the suspense almost physically, sensing the way each line on the screen magnifies emotional stakes, intensifying the narrative and deepening investment in what comes next. By the end of this moment, Daniel knows he can't ignore what he's seen. Shock has morphed into a need to verify and understand, to transform anxiety into actionable insight. He begins methodically planning his next steps, focusing on publicly available information to see if the patterns in the document correlate with external behavior. For the audience, this is the perfect setup for escalation. The quiet tension of discovery transitions into active investigation, and the story becomes a layered narrative that combines behavioral analysis, human emotion, and growing suspense. As he prepares to delve into social media accounts and online profiles, viewers are left on edge, knowing that the next phase will reveal connections, interactions, and potentially confirm the suspicions hinted at by the document. Every detail in the spreadsheet now carries weight, every earlier inconsistency takes on new meaning, and the audience is fully invested in Daniel's journey from shock to discovery, eager to see what evidence emerges next and how it will affect both him and Lisa. This segment establishes the discovery as the pivotal turning point, where suspicion transforms into concern and the narrative tension escalates sharply. The story remains grounded in observable behavior and tangible evidence without making accusations, allowing viewers to experience the unfolding mystery through Daniel's perspective, maintaining empathy while heightening curiosity. It sets up the investigative phase, priming the audience for revelations that will challenge assumptions, illuminate hidden patterns, and intensify the stakes of the engagement in a way that keeps them watching far longer than before. Daniel sat back in his chair, fingers hovering over the keyboard, heart pounding as he opened browser tabs one by one. Each click was loaded with anticipation, every scroll a small adrenaline spike as he tried to piece together the picture behind the names and notes he had discovered. Social media accounts, old posts, cryptic comments, and private messages became his window into an entirely new layer of Lisa's life, one that he hadn't seen before. At first glance, the connection seemed harmless enough. Friendly interactions, casual greetings, but as he looked closer, patterns started to emerge that made him pause. Certain profiles kept recurring, certain conversations hinted at more than just friendly exchanges, and certain promises aligned too neatly with what he had seen in the document. His mind raced, trying to separate fact from assumption, reality from speculation. Viewers could feel the tension as Daniel scrolled through each account. Every notification, every timestamp, every seemingly minor post became a potential clue. Was Lisa interacting innocently, or was there something deeper being concealed? Daniel's emotions shifted constantly. Confusion, anxiety, hope, disbelief, all swirling together as he tried to reconcile the optimistic relationship he thought he had with the information now unfolding in front of him. The screen was both a lifeline and a labyrinth, revealing details that were public yet private enough to provoke doubt. The process wasn't simple. Each profile carried its own context, its own nuances that Daniel had to decipher. Messages that might appear casual on the surface occasionally hinted at familiarity beyond friendship. Comments on photos, replies to posts, and subtle interactions created a patchwork that raised more questions than answers. Daniel could feel the creeping uncertainty weighing him down. The realization that online connections, even those seemingly harmless, could carry hidden emotional significance. He wondered if he was overthinking, if his own insecurities were coloring his interpretation, or if these patterns were genuine red flags demanding attention. For viewers, this is where engagement peaks. The ambiguity creates space for speculation, inviting the audience to weigh in emotionally and intellectually. Some fans immediately sided with Daniel, convinced that the repeated names and interactions suggested deliberate concealment. Others argued for caution, suggesting that online behavior can easily be misread and that assumptions can spiral into misunderstandings. Every scroll and click became a shared experience, as viewers debated motives, intentions, and the line between privacy and transparency. Daniel continued methodically, comparing dates, cross-referencing posts, and noting overlaps with the document he had found. Occasionally, he would pause and take a deep breath, realizing how much time he had invested in uncovering information he hadn't even asked for. The tension built with each discovery, each pattern that didn't fit neatly into the narrative he had believed in. While nothing definitively confirmed wrongdoing, the accumulation of anomalies created a sense of urgency. His mind cycled between potential explanations, innocent miscommunication, different cultural norms, or intentional omission, each possibility carrying emotional weight. The process also highlighted how complicated online relationships can be. Fans could relate to the confusion, the way digital interactions can blur boundaries and create scenarios that feel both intimate and ambiguous. Daniel's meticulous search underscored a broader truth. Online engagement is a double-edged sword. It allows connection across distances, but also provides space for misunderstandings, selective presentation, and hidden intentions. Each profile, comment, and message offered context, but also uncertainty, feeding the suspense for viewers as they tried to anticipate what Daniel might conclude next. By the end of hours spent analyzing patterns and interactions, Daniel realized that he couldn't continue in limbo. The unease, the questions, the small, nagging suspicions had reached a point where ignoring them was no longer an option. Despite the potential for confrontation, despite the fear of emotional fallout, he knew he had to address what he had discovered. Fans watching now feel the weight of the moment, the buildup of tension, the uncertainty, and the impending confrontation, all combined to create a near universal empathy for Daniel's predicament. The decision to confront Lisa wasn't impulsive. It was the logical, necessary next step after careful investigation and reflection. Daniel understood that nothing he found online could substitute for a direct conversation, a moment where he could see clarity and observe her response firsthand. Yet, the anticipation of that moment carried its own anxiety. How would she react? Would she deny everything? Provide explanations that could soothe him, or escalate the conflict further? The audience is held in suspense, fully aware that the upcoming conversation will serve as the pivotal moment where accumulated suspicion, emotional investment, and behavioral clues collide. This segment emphasizes the emotional and psychological complexity of navigating online discoveries in a relationship. It portrays Daniel's investigation as thorough and conscientious, while highlighting the natural tension and uncertainty that accompanies ambiguous digital interactions. Viewers are kept engaged through a combination of behavioral observation, narrative pacing, and layered emotional stakes. By ending with Daniel preparing to confront Lisa, the story maintains high anticipation, ensuring that the audience remains fully invested in the next act. The stage is now set for confrontation. All the warning signs, accumulated doubts, and observed patterns lead to this moment, and viewers are primed to witness the collision of expectation and reality. The narrative preserves empathy, curiosity, and suspense while moving toward the turning point where revelation and reaction will intersect dramatically. Every small observation, every calculated click, and every emotional response builds toward a confrontation that promises answers, uncertainty, and high-stakes tension. Doc Daniel's chest felt heavy as he stepped into the room, a storm of thoughts swirling in his mind. Every step weighted with anticipation and tension. He knew the conversation would be difficult, that it would test the limits of patience, composure, and trust, but he also understood it was unavoidable. The hours of investigation, the late nights of scrolling, the repeated questions without satisfactory answers, all of it had led to this moment. Lisa looked up from her phone as he approached, a faint smile on her face that didn't quite reach her eyes, and for a split second, Daniel felt a flicker of the old optimism, the hope from earlier days. But that flicker was instantly replaced by the knot in his stomach tightening. The conversation began cautiously, almost civilly. Daniel chose his words carefully, presenting what he had noticed without accusation, trying to maintain a balance between seeking truth and avoiding unnecessary escalation. He referenced patterns, repeated names, and ambiguous online interactions, making it clear that his questions were about clarity, not judgment. Lisa listened, her expression shifting subtly with each point, eyes flicking between the screen of her laptop and Daniel's steady gaze. At first, she denied any wrongdoing, insisting that the information was being misinterpreted, that the names were harmless contacts, perhaps friends or professional acquaintances. Even as she spoke, Daniel felt the weight of betrayal pressing down on him. Her calm denial, while plausible on the surface, couldn't erase the years of subtle inconsistencies he had observed. The late-night calls, the guarded behavior, the evasions that now seemed to connect like dots, forming a troubling pattern. Each word Lisa said was met with internal questions, each explanation colliding with his growing awareness that something about the relationship had shifted. Viewers experienced this tension, feeling the push and pull of doubt versus belief, empathy versus suspicion, as Daniel navigates a complex emotional terrain. The intensity of the conversation escalated slowly but unmistakably. Daniel's tone remained measured, but the emotional undercurrent was palpable. He asked pointed questions about loyalty, communication, and transparency, pressing gently but firmly for truth. Lisa's responses became defensive at times, occasionally tinged with frustration, occasionally attempting to redirect the focus onto Daniel's perceived insecurities. The interplay of denial and defensiveness layered over months of observation and suspicion created a tension that felt real and immediate, drawing viewers into the emotional gravity of the confrontation. As the discussion wore on, Daniel's initial shock and confusion gave way to a profound sense of betrayal. He reflected internally on the months of optimism, on the emotional investment he had made, and on the vision of a shared future that now felt increasingly fragile. The betrayal wasn't necessarily about confirmed actions, it was about the collapse of trust, the recognition that patterns of behavior suggested hidden realities, and the dawning awareness that the relationship might not be as transparent as he had believed. Viewers could feel the emotional weight of this realization, sensing the human cost of uncertainty and suspicion, the way trust once broken ripples across every aspect of connection. Lisa, meanwhile, grappled with the confrontation in her own way. She maintained her innocence vocally, asserting that nothing untoward had occurred, yet subtle cues, pauses, shifts in eye contact, defensive postures betrayed an emotional complexity beyond the spoken denial. This duality humanizes the story, showing that emotional fallout doesn't affect only one party, and that both people are navigating fear, pressure, and uncertainty simultaneously. The audience is invited to empathize with both perspectives, understanding that even controlled confrontations carry unpredictability and heightened emotional stakes. As the intensity of the conversation reached its peak, Daniel realized that words alone could no longer bridge the growing gap. He had presented evidence, asked questions, and attempted dialogue, yet the sense of betrayal and broken trust remained unshakable. The emotional impact was overwhelming. Months of optimism, hope, and investment collided with suspicion, doubt, and the weight of what the document had revealed. Viewers feel the tension climb as Daniel's inner conflict becomes externalized, showing how confronting hidden information can reshape the emotional landscape of a relationship in a single critical moment. Finally, after what felt like hours of tense dialogue, Daniel made a choice that would mark a definitive turning point. He reached for the engagement ring, once a symbol of commitment, trust, and shared hope, and placed it deliberately on the table between them. The gesture was deliberate, controlled, yet charged with the emotional fallout of the conversation. It wasn't dramatic in the sense of shouting or confrontation, it was decisive, quiet, and final. The physical placement of the ring crystallized the culmination of months of doubt, investigation, and emotional turmoil into a single, irreversible act. For viewers, this moment is both heartbreaking and gripping. The focus remains on the emotional consequences, not personal attack. Daniel's decision communicates loss, disappointment, and the collapse of trust, while also providing a visual and symbolic closure to a chapter of the story. The audience witnesses the tangible effects of suspicion and investigation, how patterns of behavior, unanswered questions, and perceived inconsistencies can culminate in decisive action, even when no definitive proof of wrongdoing exists. The segment closes with the room silent, but thick with unresolved tension. Daniel's hand lingers briefly over the table, his gaze fixed, reflecting the culmination of months of hope, subtle warnings, and emotional investment. Lisa's face registers a mix of frustration, confusion, and defensiveness, humanizing the impact of confrontation on both sides. The stage is now set for the aftermath, the ripple effects that extend beyond the immediate confrontation, as viewers are left contemplating the emotional, social, and relational implications of the engagement's abrupt end. This expanded segment maintains the suspense, emotional intensity, and human perspective while keeping behavior and consequences at the center. The scene captures shock, betrayal, and emotional fallout in a way that draws viewers deeper into the story, setting up the next act where aftermath and fan reaction will take center stage. The moment Daniel placed the engagement ring on the table, it wasn't just a private gesture between two people, it marked the beginning of a public storm. Within hours, the news of the breakup had spread across social media platforms, fan pages, and reality TV forums. Comments poured in like a tidal wave, a mix of outrage, sympathy, disbelief, and heated speculation. Some fans rallied behind Daniel, praising him for his courage to confront a situation that had been building quietly for months. They expressed admiration for his willingness to face unsettling truths head-on, for taking action rather than remaining silent or ignoring what he had uncovered. For these supporters, Daniel became a symbol of clarity and strength, someone willing to protect his emotional well-being in a situation that could have otherwise spiraled out of control. Yet, as always, public opinion wasn't unanimous. Others questioned whether Daniel had overreacted or whether the situation had been blown out of proportion. Some argued that online patterns can be misleading, that interactions on social media often appear more significant than they truly are, and that reading too much into them could lead to misunderstanding. These critics suggested that Lisa might not have done anything intentionally harmful, that the document could have contained harmless entries, or that context was missing from what Daniel saw. Viewers were presented with a narrative that was complex and multi-layered. One person's betrayal could be another person's misinterpretation. The debate sparked hours of discussion, with each side presenting its arguments, theories, and evidence in a digital courtroom of opinion. The narrator points out that this split reaction reflects the reality of modern relationships under the microscope of social media. Online communities thrive on immediacy, drama, and the thrill of speculation, but they also reveal how quickly perception can shape public narrative. Every fan theory, comment, and post added pressure to a situation that was already emotionally charged. Daniel found himself at the center of attention, navigating not only his own heartbreak, but also the scrutiny of thousands of observers dissecting every action, every expression, and every statement he made. The engagement's end wasn't just a personal decision anymore, it had become a public event. A story unfolding in real time that fans could follow, dissect, and debate endlessly. The emotional complexity of this stage was intense. For Daniel, the breakup was bittersweet. While he felt relief that he was no longer entangled in a situation that had become increasingly fraught with suspicion and stress, he also felt a lingering sadness. This wasn't merely the end of an engagement, it was the collapse of months of emotional investment, shared hopes, and imagined futures. Viewers could relate to that blend of relief and loss, recognizing how even justified endings carry emotional cost. The breakup was final, but the emotional ripples were far from over, affecting both Daniel and Lisa in ways that would resonate long after the public learned the news. Social media became the ultimate amplifier. Screenshots, fan reactions, and discussion threads created a feedback loop, magnifying both support and skepticism. Some posts were empathetic, highlighting Daniel's courage and the difficulty of confronting the unknown, while others were critical, speculating that he might have misinterpreted the evidence or allowed paranoia to dictate his action. The audience was now not just watching a breakup, they were part of the ongoing narrative, actively engaging, debating, and forming opinions in real time. This interaction added an entirely new layer to the story, making it more immersive and emotionally compelling. But while the online storm raged, one question loomed large. Gaining attention in comment sections, reaction videos, and forums, why did Daniel decide to file a formal report instead of quietly walking away? It was a step that elevated the situation from a private heartbreak to something that potentially involved legal or official investigation. The decision wasn't impulsive, it suggested a combination of caution, responsibility, and perhaps concern about the broader implications of what he had discovered. Some fans speculated that Daniel's report was a way to protect himself from further deception or to ensure accountability, while others wondered if it was a dramatic move intended to publicly close the chapter with clarity and finality. The narrative tension in this segment comes from the audience's curiosity about the motivation behind this extraordinary step. Filing a report is not a typical reaction to a relationship ending, and it raised both questions and ethical considerations. Viewers began to weigh the context, the months of trust erosion, the document of names and messages, the online research Daniel conducted, and the confrontation with Lisa. Taken together, these elements painted a picture of a man who felt he had reached the limits of what could be resolved privately. The question of why the report was filed became a magnet for speculation, engagement, and continued attention, keeping viewers invested in the story even after the engagement officially ended. From an emotional perspective, the segment captures the fallout for both Daniel and Lisa. For Daniel, there was a sense of agency amidst loss. He had acted decisively in response to a complex situation, asserting boundaries and protecting himself emotionally. For Lisa, the public nature of the breakup brought scrutiny, critique, and judgment whether or not any wrongdoing had occurred. The audience sees how trust collapse doesn't just end a relationship quietly, it reverberates outward, affecting perception, social dynamics, and self-image. The narrative portrays both sides with empathy, emphasizing behavior and consequences rather than personal attacks, making the story compelling, relatable, and emotionally charged. As fans continue to debate, the open question of the report keeps the story alive. The segment closes with anticipation. Viewers are left wondering what the report will reveal, whether it will confirm suspicions, or if another twist awaits in the aftermath. The engagement's end is no longer just about Daniel and Lisa. It has become a public event with social, emotional, and possibly legal ramifications, pulling the audience deeper into the story. Every comment, theory, and reaction now contributes to the ongoing drama, maintaining high engagement and setting the stage for the next phase where aftermath, revelations, and emotional consequences will unfold. This segment emphasizes emotional depth, public reaction, and narrative tension while keeping the focus on observable behaviors and decisions. It frames Daniel's actions as deliberate, measured, and consequential, sustaining suspense and curiosity while transitioning smoothly to the next stage of fan engagement and aftermath. As soon as the story broke, social media erupted into a frenzy. Screenshots, clips, and summaries of Daniel placing the engagement ring on the table spread like wildfire, hitting fan pages, reaction channels, and forums almost instantly. Reality TV fans became amateur detectives overnight, dissecting every frame, every expression, every pause in the confrontation, trying to decode meaning, motivation, and hidden subtext. Some commenters focused on the micro-expressions of Daniel's face, interpreting subtle shifts in his gaze or hesitation in his voice as signs of deep hurt or unwavering resolve. Others analyzed Lisa's reactions, debating whether her defensive body language suggested guilt, stress, or simply surprise at being confronted. Each interpretation was argued passionately, with viewers citing every previous interaction, social media post, or even offhand comments from past episodes as potential evidence. Reaction channels thrived on the story. Clips were slowed down, stills were highlighted, and commentary ran non-stop about the possible motives and intentions behind every action. Fans poured over past episodes of 90 Day Fiancé, comparing Daniel and Lisa's early behavior to the breakup moment, searching for signs they might have missed. Even small details like the way Lisa's hand trembled while defending herself, or the timing of Daniel's questions, became focal points for online debate. Discussion threads on fan forums and social media were filled with theories, some arguing that Daniel had uncovered undeniable deceit, others cautioning that the online evidence could be misleading, that patterns in digital interactions are often ambiguous and open to interpretation. The story became a mirror for fan speculation, allowing viewers to project their own expectations, biases, and emotional responses onto the situation. One aspect of the public reaction highlighted a deeper dynamic, the intense scrutiny that comes with reality TV relationships. Unlike private couples, Daniel and Lisa's interactions were constantly observed, dissected, and analyzed by an audience that thrives on drama, mystery, and narrative twists. Viewers were quick to identify small anomalies from previous episodes, late-night call mentions, or the way Lisa had previously avoided questions about her contact. Each seemingly trivial detail became amplified under the lens of public analysis, and the pressure of the scrutiny added layers to both the story and the emotional stakes. Fans weren't merely observers. They were participants, offering interpretations, demanding clarity, and contributing to the ongoing narrative in real time. Interpretations varied wildly across platforms. Some fans aligned with Daniel's perspective, emphasizing the document of names and messages, the patterns of online communication, and the confrontation as evidence that trust had been compromised. These supporters framed Daniel's actions as logical, necessary, and emotionally justified. Others leaned toward defending Lisa, suggesting that online behavior is rarely straightforward, that relationships across distances naturally involve complex social interactions, and that assumptions without direct confirmation could exaggerate the situation. These debates created an interactive tension, keeping viewers engaged, invested, and compelled to return to follow updates as more evidence or reactions emerged. The discussions didn't just stop at assigning blame or support, they evolved into broader analyses of how reality television blurs the lines between private and public life. Commenters reflected on how the cameras, social media exposure, and fan obsession can amplify minor disagreements, create misunderstandings, and put immense pressure on couples to perform or explain themselves. Daniel's confrontation and the subsequent breakup became a case study in this phenomenon. A private emotional crisis transformed into a public event, with every nuance dissected and debated. Viewers began to question not only the actions of Daniel and Lisa, but also the impact of the reality TV environment itself on trust, perception, and communication. Yet, even amidst this intense debate, a central question persisted. Hanging over every comment, video, and post, had Daniel uncovered the full truth, or was he seeing only a fragment of the story? The uncertainty fueled ongoing discussion. Fans speculated about hidden motives, undisclosed interactions, or deeper layers of the narrative that might still be concealed. Some suggested that Lisa could have explanations not yet revealed, while others feared that more troubling information could emerge. The unresolved nature of the situation created a perfect storm of suspense and speculation, encouraging viewers to remain engaged, to follow updates closely, and to emotionally invest in the potential revelations that could reshape their understanding of the breakup. The online debate also highlighted how quickly public perception can evolve in reality TV context. A single post, video, or analysis could shift the consensus from support to skepticism or vice versa, depending on new interpretations of existing evidence. The story of Daniel and Lisa became a living narrative, continuously updated by the community, and each reaction, theory, or comment added weight to the unfolding drama. Fans were no longer passive, they were co-creators of the narrative tension, shaping how the breakup was perceived, remembered, and speculated upon. Emotionally, this segment underscores the toll of public scrutiny. Daniel, already dealing with betrayal and broken trust, now faced the added pressure of a digital audience interpreting his grief, anger, and decisions. Lisa, meanwhile, contended with judgment, misinterpretation, and the amplification of her defensive reactions. The situation demonstrates how social media and reality TV intersect to magnify emotional stakes, turning personal heartbreak into a spectacle while also deepening the audience's connection to the story. As the conversation unfolds online, line, the lingering mystery remains unresolved. Viewers are drawn to the unanswered question, what else might Daniel discover? Was the document truly the tip of the iceberg, or did it represent a complete picture of the situation? The tension between what is known and what remains hidden keeps engagement high, creating anticipation for the next phase of revelations, possible follow-ups, or unseen truths that could alter perception. This segment maintains suspense, engagement, and emotional resonance, showing the power of online communities to dissect, debate, and amplify reality TV drama while keeping the story grounded in observable behavior and human reaction. The unresolved questions set the stage for further investigation, reactions, and potential twists, ensuring the audience remains hooked. Long-distance relationships are often painted as romantic adventures, full of hope and excitement, but they also carry a hidden weight that few fully understand. Daniel and Lisa's story highlights that tension, showing how emotional investment, uncertainty, and distance can amplify the smallest doubts into major crises. When a partner is far away, every delayed reply, every guarded message, and every unexplained interaction becomes magnified, taking on meaning beyond what may have been intended. The excitement of early conversations, the thrill of shared plans, and the anticipation of future meetings can be quickly overshadowed by the anxiety of not knowing. Daniel's investigation into Lisa's messages and social media interactions reflects this dynamic. His concern wasn't about trivial things. It was about patterns that, in the context of distance, trust, and emotional investment, became impossible to ignore. Fans watching the story start to recognize the subtle pressures at play. Long-distance couples often operate under a microscope, not just of each other's attention, but of the public when reality TV cameras and social media are involved. Each private action has the potential to be interpreted publicly, creating additional layers of stress. Miscommunication can appear intentional when it's not, and cultural expectations about honesty, communication, and commitment can clash in ways that exacerbate tension. Daniel's growing unease, his careful research, and his ultimate decision to confront Lisa all stem from these compounded pressures. He wasn't merely suspicious, he was navigating a landscape of emotional stakes that had been amplified far beyond what most couples experience. The audience begins to understand that Lisa's behavior, the late-night calls, and the guarded phone interactions might have been interpreted differently under ordinary circumstances. For Daniel, however, the combination of distance, prior small doubts, and evidence in the document created a tipping point. This segment encourages viewers to step back and consider how context shapes perception. The same actions could feel innocent or threatening depending on the observer's perspective, prior knowledge, and emotional state. By reflecting on these psychological dynamics, the story gives viewers insight into the emotional pressures that long-distance couples face, helping them empathize with both Daniel and Lisa without assigning blame. Public attention adds another layer to the complexity. Reality TV couples are performing for the camera even when they think they are being private, and fans scrutinize every interaction. This magnification can lead to misunderstandings and heightened anxiety. Every interaction, text, or call becomes subject to interpretation, judgment, and debate. Daniel's feelings of betrayal were not just about the content he discovered, they were about the compounded stress of interpreting behaviors under these extraordinary circumstances. The audience is guided to see that trust, perception, and expectation are intertwined, and when disrupted, they can cause immense emotional turbulence. The segment reconnects with earlier clues in the story. The warning signs, subtle behavior changes, and inconsistencies in communication are revisited with a psychological lens. Each moment that initially seemed minor, the locked phone, the evasive answers, the late-night messages, now takes on a deeper meaning when viewed through the lens of long-distance pressures and emotional strain. Viewers start to reconsider whether Daniel's reaction was justified, whether Lisa's responses were misleading or simply misunderstood, and how the accumulation of stressors can push a relationship to the brink. It reframes the narrative, emphasizing patterns, perception, and context rather than jumping to conclusions. By focusing on the emotional mechanics of trust and uncertainty, this segment helps the audience think critically about relationships under scrutiny. It acknowledges that even in carefully observed situations, motivations can be ambiguous, intentions can be misunderstood, and emotional stakes can create high tension. Fans are encouraged to analyze the events without rushing to judgment, considering how vulnerability, distance, and public attention interact to create situations that can feel overwhelming, even when no one is deliberately acting maliciously. The reflective tone also primes the audience for emerging revelations. By understanding the psychological pressures at play, viewers are better prepared to interpret subsequent twists in the story. Each new detail, each added layer of the narrative now carries emotional significance beyond the surface drama. Fans begin to question, were the warning signs real indicators of deceit, or were they symptoms of the emotional and psychological strain inherent in long-distance, public-facing relationships? This sets up anticipation for the next segment, where the story will reveal new evidence, deepen suspense, and potentially challenge assumptions made earlier in the narrative. Through these insights, the segment reinforces empathy for both Daniel and Lisa. It highlights that emotional complexity, perception, and miscommunication can dramatically shape behavior, and that viewers' interpretation of events is often influenced by incomplete information. By combining reflection with connection to earlier clues, the story keeps fans engaged, encouraging them to revisit prior moments in the narrative and consider alternative explanations. This layered approach maintains curiosity while enhancing emotional investment, sustaining high retention as the audience anticipates what will unfold next. Ultimately, this segment underscores a central truth of long-distance and reality TV relationships. Trust is fragile, perception is powerful, and the interplay of emotional pressure, miscommunication, and public attention can transform minor uncertainties into dramatic turning points. Viewers are left reflecting on what they would do in Daniel's position, questioning their own assumptions about honesty, loyalty, and perception. The unresolved questions prepare them for the emerging twists, keeping suspense high and curiosity alive, while building a nuanced understanding of the psychological dynamics behind the conflict. Even after the engagement ended, the questions lingered heavy and insistent. Had Daniel uncovered something truly serious, or had months of miscommunication and suspicion created a storm where none should have existed? Fans replayed the confrontation, dissected the document of names, and debated every interaction, every glance, every hesitation. The final twist wasn't dramatic in the sense of a sudden revelation. It was the realization that the truth might be far more complicated than anyone initially assumed. What Daniel discovered opened a door, but it didn't close the story. Some of the names and patterns he found remained unexplained, and viewers were left wondering whether there were layers to Lisa's life that were never meant to be fully visible. Even now, the story hung in a delicate balance between betrayal and misunderstanding. Daniel's report had formalized the breakup, marking an official end to the engagement, but the online debate, fan speculation, and unanswered questions created a tension that refused to settle. Every post and comment online reinforced that reality TV couples are rarely just private people. They are constantly performing for and judged by an audience hungry for drama. What seemed private and intimate to Daniel and Lisa became a spectacle for millions, and the ambiguity of actions and intentions only amplified the suspense. The narrative shifted from a personal heartbreak to a broader lesson about perception, trust, and the pressure of being observed. This final twist underscores the idea that not all conclusions are neat. The audience realizes that even with investigation, confrontation, and decisive action, certainty is elusive. Daniel's decision to walk away, to place the ring on the table, and to file a report was final from a personal perspective, but the story's emotional and social consequences were ongoing. Viewers were drawn into this unresolved tension, questioning whether the breakup revealed deception, misunderstanding, or a combination of both. Every fan theory, comment, and discussion thread became part of the narrative, extending the suspense beyond the immediate events. The story then gently pivots to the broader 90 Day Fiancé universe. Daniel and Lisa's situation, while unique, is not isolated. Across the show, couples face similar crises, small doubts snowball into suspicion, emotional distance grows into confrontation, and moments once private become public spectacle. The narrator connects the unresolved questions of trust and perception in Daniel's story to another couple currently navigating a parallel situation. This approach creates an organic bridge, linking the emotional beats and suspense of this story to the next, keeping viewers invested and curious about what will unfold. Fans are left with an open loop. Just as Daniel struggled to distinguish fact from fear, another couple is now in a position where trust is fragile and public scrutiny looms large. The uncertainty is palpable, and the tension is designed to hold attention until the next episode. Viewers are encouraged to reflect on what they've learned, to revisit the subtle signs they may have missed, and to anticipate the emotional and narrative stakes of the new couple's story. The unresolved questions about Daniel and Lisa serve as both a climax and a bridge, maintaining engagement while expanding the 90-day Fiance drama universe for the audience. Emotionally, the segment leaves the audience with a mix of shock, intrigue, and anticipation. Daniel's actions were decisive, but the story emphasizes that even decisive actions don't always provide closure or clarity in the eyes of the public. Lisa's behavior, while examined and scrutinized, remains partially ambiguous, keeping curiosity alive. By ending on a reflective, suspenseful note, the narrative ensures that viewers remain invested, thinking critically about trust, perception, and relationships, and eager to watch the next story unfold. The final moments highlight the unresolved details that make reality TV so compelling. Even as one engagement ends, the themes of trust, deception, miscommunication, and public scrutiny continue to ripple across the show. Viewers are reminded that in the 90-Day Fiance universe, no relationship exists in isolation, and every twist or revelation has consequences that extend beyond a single couple. The story sets the stage for further analysis, speculation, and discussion, creating anticipation for the next video while reinforcing the emotional and psychological complexity of these relationships. By leaving certain questions unanswered and pointing toward another couple facing similar challenges, the narrative maintains suspense, emotional tension, and curiosity. Viewers are compelled to continue following the channel, not simply to see the next confrontation, but to understand how patterns of behavior, trust, and public scrutiny repeat across different stories. The unresolved mystery and parallel setup create a natural continuity, encouraging sustained engagement and keeping fans invested in the broader unfolding drama. Ultimately, the segment reinforces that reality TV relationships are never simple. The final twist isn't an explosive revelation, it's the understanding that context, perception, and emotional stakes often leave the most significant questions unanswered. Daniel's story serves as a lens through which viewers examine human behavior, emotional vulnerability, and the pressures of love under public scrutiny. By ending with a setup for another couple in crisis, the segment ensures that engagement remains high, curiosity is piqued, and anticipation builds for the next chapter of the ongoing 90-Day Fiance narrative.